Hello world, welcome back to Razor RC. It's time to do another transmitter review. So these are some of my favorite reviews to do of all time. I like doing car reviews and I really like doing radio transmitter reviews. I don't know why, I guess I just like trying different things. So anyways, pick this up. This is the brand new Futaba T4PM, also known as the 4PM. T just stands for telemetry, so it is obviously a telemetry enabled radio. It's been out for a few months and I got a good deal on this, so I picked one of these up and yeah, I want to do a review on this. So I'm going to talk about this in a bunch of different categories as usual, give you my rating on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. 3 stars would be kind of average as compared to other radios in this class, so those would be things like the Sandwell MTS and the Spectrum DX5 Pro. 5 stars would be excellent, pretty much best in class, and 1 star would be really poor. So yeah, let's get into it. First thing we're gonna do is kind of show off the radio. So the Futaba 4PM, T4PM. As you can see, the display, let's just kind of turn that thing on. Backlit display, dot matrix style. So all the typical information, timer, the model number that you're using, the voltage. Here's a little telemetry information, tells you that currently it's not connected to anything. The steering and throttle trims, you can see down there below, and then actually these are the trim buttons. So you can kind of see the trims if they get moved. Dual rate, ATL is, I think it stands for adjustable throttle length, but it's basically the braking that you have set up. And then all your telemetry information, so such as voltage, temperature, RPM, that kind of thing. So yeah, pretty interesting little radio. It sells for $230 to $270 depending on how it's equipped. There's a few different options with receivers. I got the $230 version, so it's got the more basic TFHSS radio. And so yeah, this is basically their like mid-range radio. On the low end, they got the 3PV, which I also had. On the high end, they have something like the 7PX, which is a really nice radio. So this is kind of their mid-range. Look, it's really for people that want to upgrade from like a more basic radio, maybe want some more of the advanced features. Maybe they're running like Nitro, which has a little more things. This is more suitable for that. Telemetry, and then the other thing this thing has is a bunch of the S-Bus control. So Futaba has a special line of programmable servos and ESCs, and for those electronics, they're fairly expensive, but you can actually control those and make adjustments to them through the radio itself. Now on the back side, we actually have a power cable, so you can actually charge Futaba batteries using this. A COM link, I believe that's for actually updating the firmware, and then what they call a micro SD card, so you can actually stick in the SD card there and actually save stuff to it. So yeah, pretty interesting overall. Fairly basic grip, just a smooth grip, no rubberized texture or anything like that. A lot of adjustments with the trigger. There's actually wheel tension, trigger tension, their ATL brake length, so you can actually adjust how far the brake goes back. And then there's actually trigger adjustments, so you can adjust, you can slide it forward or backward depending on how far you want the length to the trigger to be. A couple switches down here for, they're basically called DT trim things, so digital trim. So this one's used for dual rate. This one you can also set to different things by default, it doesn't do anything. A little single switch here, a hold down switch, so when you push this switch it actually holds down the value of whatever you have it set to. And then a dial, sort of a analog dial type thing where you can have infinitely adjustable, and then one more trim back here, which I think is set to ATL, or no, I'm sorry, this is the channel 3 trim. So yeah, that's basically all the switches. A lot of adjustments, they're programmable, so you can set these things to different channels, different modes like ABS on off, a lot of different things for all these switches. So pretty typical for the price range. In the battery compartment, we'll pop this open. It actually comes with a 3 AA battery pack. You're not supposed to use nickel metal hydride, so I actually took out that little battery pack and stuck in a life battery. So this is also life compatible. It's got a Futaba plug, as you would expect any Futaba radio. And so yeah, this is what I would recommend. Use a life battery pack. You can also set the radio down like that. Pretty typical. Yeah, so that's what the Futaba 4PM looks like. Okay, let's take a closer look at the menu system and the actual controls. So as you can see, the display, it is actually backlit. And then on the control side, it's got a little joystick here. It's kind of got like up, down, left, right, and you push it down to enter. It's got an N button to go back up the menu system, and then a plus minus to basically adjust the values. And then here's a power switch. Nice little blue LEDs, give you that cool look, futuristic styling. And so we're gonna kind of go into the menu system. So this is the main display, but you can push right or left on the joystick and actually get into the individual menus. In the first menu, you got all your normal stuff that you would use for racing, bashing, that kind of thing. So Expo basically adjusts the throttle and steering curves. So you can do the forward on and brake on the throttle, the steering. So if you wanted to kind of ramp up a little bit quicker as you're turning the wheel or as you're pulling the throttle, that's what steering Expo will do. Speed is basically to adjust how quick how responsive basically those channels are. So steering is channel 1, throttle is channel 2, but you can actually slow things down. If you've got a really nervous car, maybe it steers too quickly, you can kind of tone it down, kind of numb it a little bit by adjusting the steering and throttle speed. So I actually use this on my HB Racing D418 because it's a little bit too twitchy. This kind of makes it a little bit easier to control, especially through those corners. So I actually find that a very useful feature. Throttle acceleration is actually used for a nitro thing, so you can actually ramp up the curves on your throttles a little bit more. So I don't have nitro cars, so I don't use that. ABS is another anti-lock brake system. Futaba supports that. I think all the Futaba radios pretty much from the 3PV up use this, but this is a little more advanced, so a lot of different things, delay, cycle, duty, etc. I don't use ABS because it's illegal in racing, but certainly is there for your adjustment if you want. And then throttle mode is again another nitro thing, so you're braking, your idle up, etc. I don't run nitro, so this is not a feature I use, but it's only the Futaba 4PM has a lot of adjustments really for nitro cars especially. There's like almost like half the stuff here in this menu system right here is actually for nitro type vehicles. On the more basic side, you've got reversing for all your different channels. So if your servo's upside down, you can reverse it. If your throttle for some reason needs to be reversed, you can do that. And then you have additional channels 3 and 4. This is a 4-channel radio only. Sub-trim you would always want to use to set on your steering, sub-trim and trim. So sub-trim is basically just finer granularity. Trim you want to set up because your servo is never going to be perfectly centered, and so you'll have to set that up for your normal steering neutral point. Then endpoints is again very typical and something that you'll want to set up. So basically you want to limit your steering left and right so you're not trying to overextend the servo. The radio doesn't know what car your servo is actually mounted in. It doesn't know how far the servo can actually turn, so you always have to set that. Dual rate, of course, steering and throttle. So steering is a little bit different. Steering dual rate is a little bit different from endpoints. Endpoints you kind of want to just set independently. So maybe the right you can turn this far, the left you can turn this far. Dual rate basically, once you have those set, you can also again kind of reduce the whole overall steering or overall throttle if you want. Useful, you know, if you give your car to a kid who's never driven before, you can turn down the throttle dual rate so that they don't actually have full power. And then your channels 3 and 4, you can set the position so when you hit that switch or you make that adjustment, what does it actually go to? So that's menu 1. The second menu here, as I mentioned, is basically all the different model things. So you can select, name, copy. I'm not sure what this is. Oh, reset. You also copy it from one radio to another through that link on the side. So pretty interesting. If you got 2 of these radios, you can actually copy the information. Really useful. You can also copy it to that SD card there on the side. S-Bus and MC-Link are basically to adjust the Futaba servos that support this. So servos sometimes have different settings, so you can adjust like the speed and return points and stuff like that. ESCs again are sometimes programmable from the radio, so Futaba one, so you can actually control from this radio. I don't have any of those, so I can't show you that. Fail safe is what you want to set basically for your different channels. If it loses contact with the radio, where does it actually go back to so it doesn't maintain throttle? And then the actual receivers for bonding, this is what you use. So that's the second menu. Okay, the third menu item is for all of your mixing. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of mixing options with this. Steering mixing, brake mixing. You can actually have Futaba branded gyros and actually adjust them through this menu system, 4-wheel steering. Even 2 ESCs with 2 motors, just a crazy amount of mixing. You can program the mixing to combine multiple channels. So a lot of mixing options. These are not things I typically use, but if you're into that, maybe you have tracked vehicles, nitro cars, etc. This is actually something you might be interested in. The actual switches you can also adjust, so all the different switches you can program to do different things. You know, turn ABS on, off, etc., and obviously set the direction of those programmable switches. And then the trim dials, those DTM 1 through 5, you can actually adjust what they do. So by default, DTM 1, 2 is steering, throttle, trim, all these different things. So you can program what you want those actual trims to do. So that's menu item number 3. Moving on to menu item number 4. So this is the lap timer. So a lot of timer adjustments as well. You can actually do things like count up, count down. You can use it to track your laps for maybe fuel consumption. If you're in a big nitro race, 40-minute race or whatever, you can keep track of when you might be running out of gas. Shows you all the different laps and the timers. So telemetry information, you can actually program which ones you're actually using. So by default, you get receiver, battery, voltage, but you can also hook up voltage sensors, temperature sensors, RPM, etc. And then it's also keeping track of that information. So you have log data about, what is your battery at, what was your temperature at over the life of this run, etc. So all a bunch of logging for the telemetry. I don't have any of those cool sensors, so I can't show you that. And then the actual wheel adjustments. So if you need to calibrate your throttle and your wheel trigger. Finally, you got the information, shows you the firmware version, what region, so there's a US version and the ID. And then the system, so this is for things, the display, if you want it backlit, how long you want it lit for, etc., what type of battery you're using. So it does actually have a couple different options. Dry cell is alkaline. I'm running life battery, so that's what I've got there. And then you have basically low voltage or sort of timeout values to warn you if you haven't used your radio in a while. So yeah, that's pretty much all the options in the menu. Time to get into the actual rating portion of this review. So first thing I want to talk about are the features, and this thing has a crazy amount of features. I showed you everything in the menu system, a lot of things for mixing, a lot of things for nitro cars, timers, telemetry, just a crazy amount of features. Pretty much everything you could possibly want in a radio. I think most people are not going to use 80 or 90% of these features. But if you're looking for that, this can do everything you would want and more. So yeah, just a ton of features. Really, I think best in class. The only thing I don't like is it's only a 4-channel radio, so it's not really quite as good for bashing. If you've got something like a Traxxas TRX4 that needs a 5-channel radio, this doesn't have it. So this is a little more, I think, on the race side than the basher side, but very good radio overall. I mean, the features, 5 stars. I think it's best in class, basically. The adjustable triggers and stuff are really, really nice. So for this sort of mid-range price point, I think it's really, really good. Okay, let's talk about the design and construction. So overall, a really nice radio, high quality plastics. Futaba radios all tend to have very, very nice plastics. Feels good in the hand. The handle does not have that rubberized grip, but overall, fits quite comfortably, especially with that adjustable trigger. Can kind of tailor it to how you want to actually hold in your hand. No slop in the trigger, extremely smooth. No slop in the wheel, extremely smooth. So just a high quality, high feeling, really good radio. Integrated antenna, of course, just sort of that little shark fin thing on top. Overall, I'm going to give it 4 stars. Really, the only thing I don't like is the grip. I find the grip, swept back, just a little bit less comfortable. It would be nice to have some sort of rubberized grip, because if your hand gets a little sweaty, it gets a little bit slippery in the hand. You could always wrap like tennis grip tape around this or something like that. But overall, a really nice design construction. I'm going to give it 4 stars. All right, next up is the display and the menu system. Pretty easy to use, really nice display. I do like that it's backlit. Some of the other competitors are not backlit. Pretty logical layout, pretty easy to use. You know, get your 4 basic menu systems, so you kind of go up and down, not difficult to get to any of the settings. The only thing I don't really like about the display menu is this little jog button. It's not the easiest thing to use. The Sanwa's got just sort of push buttons that I find a little bit easier to use. The Spectrum has like a little jog wheel, which is not really that great either. So depending on how good you are with your little thumb control, this could be easy or difficult to use. I find it okay, not great. But overall, really nice menu system, really nice display, backlit, high quality display. So I'm gonna give it 4 stars in the menu and display category. Okay, next up is the performance. So obviously a 2.4 gigahertz radio, supports SFHSS, which is the older Futaba frequency. It also supports TFHSS, which is their telemetry enabled version. And also supports the new TFHSS SR, which is even faster. So Futaba does not actually release specs on the performance numbers. It doesn't tell you the actual frame rate, but I've seen some independent testing on these, and for the SFHSS stuff, it seems like it's kind of in the like 11 millisecond latency range. For the TFHSS stuff, you're getting into like the 5 and 4 millisecond range, so very, very fast. If you have the SR stuff, you know, presumably that's even faster, the 1 to 2 millisecond range probably. So I don't think most people can really tell the difference below TFHSS. Even between 5 and 11 milliseconds, it's very hard to tell. But the performance on this is obviously very, very good. Certainly up there and competitive with all the other radios on the market. Very, very fast radio. Some people feel like Futaba is not quite as intuitive, or maybe you don't feel quite as locked in to say things like the Sanwa. So my experience has been, it feels really, really good. I don't know if it's any better or worse than the Sanwa stuff. I do like the Sanwa stuff as well, but certainly by the numbers, by the data, this is a very high performing radio. I'm going to give it 4 stars in the performance category. Okay, let's talk about the controls, and this is again a really nice strong point of this radio. The adjustable trigger tension and adjustable wheel tension. You can slide the trigger forward and back. You can adjust the braking portion of this to see how far you want. You know, if you have short fingers like me, you don't want to have to try to extend your fingers so far. So a lot of adjustments in there. The foam wheel, it's a little bit more of a squared off foam. The Sanwas are a little bit more rounded, so a little bit different feel, but very smooth radio, very smooth steering wheel. So I do like the controls a lot. Things I would have preferred is some sort of rubberized grip. The Sanwa does not have that, the MTS does not have that, but the Spectrum does. So the Spectrum I find a little more comfortable in the handle. So controls wise, because of all those adjustments, I'm gonna give it above average score, 4 stars. I don't think it's best in class, but it is really, really good. So certainly deserves an above average rating. 4 stars in the controls category. The thing I really like about Futaba receivers is there's a lot of options, and especially if you want a wireless one or an antenna-less one. These aren't really antenna-less, they're inside the receiver, but you get something like this. R204 GFE is about $40 or so. Really nice receiver, and no external antenna to kind of get tangled up or, you know, figure out how to route that. So this is not the highest performing receiver, but they also make something like the 304 SBE, which is similar, just a little bit faster. So I really like the Futaba receivers overall. I think they're pretty much some of the best receivers out there. Spectrum makes good wireless receivers, but they're quite expensive. Sanwa also makes really nice ones, but they're quite expensive. So overall, I actually like Futaba receivers probably the best of all the different major brands. So I'm gonna give the receivers a 5-star rating. They're not horribly expensive like the other brands, and then you can get these antenna-less ones for quite cheap. So I think they're excellent, 5 stars in the receiver category. Futaba lists this at 100 meters, 70 meters if you're using sort of this antenna-less type receiver. I would give it pretty much an average score, 3 stars. I don't know if it's actually further than 100 meters. A lot of people feel that Futaba doesn't make the longest range radios, but they only list it at 100 meters, which is kind of average, I think, in this class. So I'm going to give it 3 stars in the range category. For the manual, the 4PM actually comes with this really nice manual, nice glossy instructions, a lot of diagrams, a little bit convoluted at times. It doesn't lay it out exactly in the same order as the menu system. The other thing I didn't like is this is actually a short manual. It does not have everything about this radio inside this, just kind of more simple adjustments, but it doesn't explain mixing, doesn't really explain some of the nitro stuff. So you actually have to go to the website to pick up the full manual if you want everything explained. So I had to do that. I went to Futaba USA to get the English manual. I'm gonna give the manual 3 stars. I like Futaba manuals in general, but I wish they included the extensive manual within the box and not just sort of this short version. Okay, the 4PM sells for between $230 and $270 depending on which version you get. The Sanwa is a little bit cheaper. The MTS sells for about $200. The Spectrum is a little bit more. I think it's closer to $300, sort of in the high $200 range. So this is kind of average in that price range. So I'm gonna give it a 3-star rating, $230. I think it's about average, not expensive, not cheap, but you know, okay overall. Thoughts on the Futaba 4PM is that it's a really good radio. I think it's geared a little bit more towards racing than say crawling because you're limited by the number of channels. There's only 4 channels, probably not really enough for some of your more advanced crawlers out there with a lot of scale lights or winches or what, you know, 4-wheel steering, etc. So pretty good race radio overall. I think the performance on this thing is excellent, certainly comparable with all the other radios out there. I like the way this you know, radio feels in the hand overall because you can kind of tailor it to how you want it to fit in your hand. The trigger pull especially. The steering wheel is quite nice, a little bit more fat, a little bit more squared off, but you know, certainly a really nice radio overall. High performance, really a lot of features. Much more than some of the other radios out there. So overall, I think it's an excellent radio. Definitely nothing wrong with this radio. Nice display, a lot of battery options. Just good overall. Quite impressed with it. Also have the Sanwa MTS. Maybe I'll do a heads-up comparison review between those two, but certainly an excellent radio. I find nothing really wrong with this overall. And I think if you bought one, if you're a Futaba fan, especially if you have other Futaba receivers or you like the Futaba receivers, I think this is definitely you know, a really good pick. So overall, this gets, you know, basically 2 thumbs up. It's a good radio. Happy with it overall, and definitely going to keep it within my radio stable. So anyways, thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, hit the notifications button. Look for more videos soon, and thanks for watching.